Alright guys, how you doing? It's Rabea. I hope you're all well. So hopefully some of you remember my trip to Japan last September with the guys from That Pedal Show, Mick and Dan, and Ola England. We went over there to visit Boss, meet up with the guys there, meet President Yoshi and all the team to be introduced to a new product that they were working on at the time, to get our opinions and to hear it and see what we think of it. Well, it's really exciting for me now because I can actually show you this product that some of you will know about, but it's nice to have it here in my home studio and give you some demonstration of how it sounds. So this video is all about the Boss Waza Tube Amp Expander. So as you all know, I use Loadbox IR loaders at home. That's generally how I record everything that you hear when you see a video of mine. Any demo is done using Loadboxes. And I have been using the 2 Notes Torpedo Studio, which is one of my personal favorites. I love that thing. I've used it for a long time. And I also use the Universal Audio Oxbox, which is a fantastic, awesome sounding load box with a great user interface and attenuation built in, which is different to 2 Notes because you can't attenuate on that. Either way, they both have pros and cons. And now we get to look at the Waza Tube Amp Expander. And it feels to me like Boss have taken their time, looked around to see what other companies are doing, and kind of worked out what they want to do and how they want to improve on all the other products that are out there, or at least give their own spin on it. So with that in mind, the Tube Amp Expander kind of answers all the questions that people have had about other products in the past. In this video, I don't really want to get too heavy on the details of the inner mechanics and of how it works and all that kind of stuff, but I want to give you an overview of what's going on and also show you some of the tones and the user interface and how it all works together using your computer in a home studio setup like I have. So firstly, let me give you a rundown of its features. There's a lot of features, so I've got a few notes here, but what the Tube Amp Expander has is it's a reactive load with an integrated 100-watt power amp, which I'll explain in a minute. You've got twin XLR out, so left and right. You've got an effects loop built into this. It's MIDI controllable. You can save up to 10 different rigs that are accessible using this control on the front. You've got a dual speaker out, so it can power 2 speaker cabinets with its 100-watt power section that it's got in there. It's got onboard effects like reverb and delay, compression, and you can have graphic or parametric EQ as well. And all the sounds that you hear can be heard either through the XLR or into the cabinet. So there are a few extra cool little features that I'll explain in a moment, but generally speaking, that's how it works. You've also got a USB feed that you can record audio with. You can even reamp with this thing, run it into your computer and all the rest of it. So it's worth talking really quickly about how a reactive load box works, in case you didn't know. Essentially, a reactive load box is a type of circuit to emulate the natural impedance curves and responses that happen between an amplifier's output transformer and the speaker itself. The reason for that is that essentially what it's doing is it's allowing the amplifier to see a specific type of speaker, and that really what it does is give you a better feel and response overall of how an amplifier would feel in real life into a cabinet. Now obviously Tube Amp Expander is a reactive load box alongside things like the aux and the 2 Notes. Generally have one type of reactive load, and really that's, you could say that reactive load may be in this case like a 112. So when you plug your amplifier into a reactive load box that's reactive load is designed around, say, a 112 speaker, the amplifier sees a 112 speaker, if that makes sense. Now some amplifiers aren't designed for specifically 112 speakers. For example, the VX100, the Super Kraken, is a high gain stack, which is really meant to go into something like an oversized 212 or a 4x12 speaker cabinet. Just because of the way it's designed to use that level of speaker and the amount of impedance that's going to react with the amplifier is very different in feel and response to something like a 1x12. So if you've ever plugged your amplifier into a reactive load box and it hasn't quite given you the feel that you wanted or you were expecting, that's probably why, is that the reactive load circuit designed in that specific load box you might have used may be designed around a 112 or a 212 or a 412 when you want to use it with like a clean amp, which might want 410 speakers. Basically, it's quite complicated, but that's generally how a reactive load box works. So this is where Tube Amp Expander really sets itself apart from other products in its sort of genre is that it has 16 reactive loads inside it, which mean, and none of those are digital either, so it's all analog, and it means that you will get the right response for the amplifier that you want to use. And they've provided this on these two dials on the front here. If you can see on the close-up cam, what we're looking at is resonance Z and presence Z. Now there's probably a way more high-tech explanation for what they represent, but in a nutshell, what they represent are the impedance curves of the reactive load. So if I'm plugging into a 412, that will have a certain resonance and presence curve and all that kind of stuff. That means it will give me the right feel and response that I'm expecting to hear when I plug something like a high gain stack into this. So it isn't just limited to one feel and response, if that makes sense. It just makes it way more expansive, and it does mean that you will get the feel and response you want from your amplifier, or should I say you're expecting to hear. So if we look at the close-up, you can see each dial has 4 different settings on it. You've got low, low mid, and high, and these are impedance responses. And it works for both resonance and presence. And that's just all to do with the way that speaker moves and provides the sound wave and shifts the air, if that makes sense. It allows the output transformer to work more synergistically with the speaker that you're trying to emulate using a reactive load box. In a nutshell, it just allows you to dial in your reactive load very specifically to the amp you're using. That's all I'm trying to say. But for all those people that want a bit more of an explanation, hopefully I did that in a concise manner. The next key feature with Tube Amp Expander is its attenuation. Now, the idea is that you plug your amp into it and you can crank it to the desired level where your amp sounds best, and then you attenuate it to bring the overall level down, not affecting the output of the amplifier, if that makes sense. So if you're on stage and you're playing an old Marshall Plexi that needs to be cranked, but it's way too loud for the sound engineer, the idea would be that you attenuated it so the feel and response is the same, but the signal given throughout the speaker cab to the sound engineer is manageable. Now, the only problem that's happened in the past with all these kind of things is that generally it affects the EQ, it affects the top end, it can affect the EQ overall, because it has to use a certain type of circuitry through transistors to be able to do that. And often it doesn't necessarily give you that desired feel you're expecting. And also, sometimes, some types of attenuation are either too much or too little when you're actually trying to do it. So what Tube Amp Expander have done is they've integrated a 100-watt analog power section into Tube Amp Expander. So you send your signal from your amplifier, from your head, into it, use the reactive load, like dial it in how you want it, and then it takes the the signal from your amp head, and then passes it through a 100-watt power section. And the reason that is a really, really cool idea is, for example, let's say you've got a 1-watt amp, or let's say you've got an old 5-watt, one of those class 5s that Marshall did, and you really love the sound of it, but you'll never get it loud enough over a drum kit. Plug into Tube Amp Expander, and you've suddenly got a 100-watt version of that Marshall class 5, if that makes sense. It's just a really, really interesting way of doing it. And it also means that you're not affecting that EQ response of your amplifier when you're attenuating it, because you've taken the signal, it's going into a load, it's safe, it's sound, and then you're sending it to that 100-watt power section, which means you can just dial it in as you want, and it never affects the sound or feel of your amplifier. And on top of that, having the ability to change the reactive load and the response and the impedance response of it, it's a really interesting way around the problem of attenuation, which has obviously been the case for many companies trying to do this, and it really does work. And again, that added benefit of being able to send a really small wattage amp that sounds sick when you crank it, but it's never loud enough, into 100 watts and then boost it, is amazing. Hopefully all that made sense. John is able to whittle it down to the most important information for you all. The other cool features about Tube Amp Expander are things like, let's say you've got an old Marshall Plexi which doesn't have an effects loop in it. Tube Amp Expander has onboard effects, but also it has its own effects loop, which can be sent through the XLR outs to your sound engineer or your mixing desk, or out through the cab. So all the effects that you can add to the sound of your amplifier going in can then be sent through the cab, which is really, really awesome because of using that 100-watt power section, and it's passing that signal through and then providing you any of the effects you want. It's just a really, really interesting way of doing it. So yeah, like I said, any amplifier, vintage amplifier with no effects loop, now has an effects loop using Tube Amp Expander. It's also an IR loader, so you can load your own impulse responses into Tube Amp Expander, which is what I've done here. I'll show you a couple of the ones on board and how it works, but also I'm going to show you what it sounds like using my impulse responses that I prefer to use, and then being able to blend it in with the effects on board and all that kind of stuff. Being able to control this with the foot controller you can plug in and the control light you can use for your amplifier, it means that I can have 10 savable rigs with different styles of either impulse response, effects blend, I can change channel, it's MIDI controllable, so I can use any controller I want to do that. Yeah, Boss have always think of everything. They always give you everything you're ever going to need, and then it's up to you to choose what you want to use, how you want to use it for your application. And also, it's rack mountable, so you can shove this in a rack, take it on tour with you, and always give your front of house engineer left and right if you wanted to, and still hear it out the cab, attenuate it, boost it if you want to. It really is a great, it's expandable, expansive. Makes sense why they called it what they called it. So for this demo, I'm going to be using my VX100 running in at 8 ohms, and I've chosen the appropriate impedance responses with the reactive loads to give me the right feel that I expect to feel when I'm playing my VX100. I'll show you a close-up of the top of the Tube Amp Expander with a block diagram and a little chart to give you an example of what reactive loads to use depending on the type of amp, whether it be a tweed combo, a clean amp, a high gain stack, a rectifier, whatever it is. Really handy having that on top there. And I'm also going to show you really quickly how we use the editor and how you can load IRs onto it and all that kind of stuff. But most importantly, we've got the tech specs out of the way. Let's hear how it sounds. Okay, next I'm going to show you really fast how to use the editor, how to navigate and control Tube Amp Expander with a computer, and we're going to get into some tones. So let's take a look. Okay, so we'll take a quick look at the editor that you can use for Tube Amp Expander. This is what will happen when you plug it in. I've got it plugged in using MIDI into USB, but it works with USB as well. Librarian is any kind of sets that you save using any kind of presets for live. System is, of course, everything to do with just the back end of stuff. So global EQs, your MIDI, even speaker up polarity. Fletcher Munson curve, which I believe is a type of adaptive EQ for changing volumes when it comes to like attenuating or boosting overall master volumes. It's very interesting, very geeky. We'll go into it another time. So yeah, that's that. Anyway, back to editor. So as you can see, this is what we're looking at. This is as simple as the signal chain is. So your amp goes in, you can turn your effects up on or off if you need to. This is to let you know signals hitting. Then you've got your first effect in the chain, which is compression. You've got two different types of compression to use, and a very simple amount of parameters there. Then to delay, you've got a combination of things from single, pan delay, stereo delay, analog, and then the space echo, or the SDE, 3000. And that's that. And then we've got reverb, which can also be controlled from the front of the Tube Amp Expander, but it's also worth pointing out that you can fine-tune the type of reverbs and the sound you want, specifically using the editor. So you've got tons, you've got hall, two different types of hall, two different types of room, spring and plate, and of course all the parameters that you would ever need to make that sound how you want it. Then the signal gets split off. So basically that represents speaker level, signal, and out the speaker. But we're just doing line outs here using XLRs because it's a home studio setup. So as you can see, we go reverb and then we break off and we go to line EQ. So this is my EQ, either parametric or graphic, for my line out. So I'm affecting this exactly how I need to go into my DAW. As you can see, I use graphics. I just prefer looking at frequencies this way. And then we hit the speaker sim part. So in here, we've obviously got 16 different types of speaker that they're giving you, including front of house sort of tailored speaker impulses. There you can use everything from like a high gain stack, rectifier, as you see, all listed here, which is very, very decent. And then I've loaded in 4 of my own IRs, a combination of different microphones, things like NTRs, KM184s, stuff like that. But so what happens is when I use my own speaker impulse, I can't affect the mic type, the mic distance, the mic position. I can still add a room mic. Anechoic would be completely dead.
So you wouldn't have any room. You can have a small or a large room, which is very, very cool because it gives you a different type of ambience depending on what it is you're trying to do. And remember, all of this that you can see here is going to come out of the speaker as well. So any of the reverb, delay and compression that you want to that amp with no effects loop, for example, will come out of here. And of course, you can control your amp, as I said before. And these are your 10 presets that are all assigned to the knob on the front of Tube Amp Expander, as simple as turning the rig knob and getting where you want to get with it. So that would be Librarian.
Okay, so I've got my guitar. I thought I'd whip out the old Proto 1 of the ML3 Beer just because it's been a while and I had it set up and serviced by Pablo. Anyway, as I said, running to the Super Crack and straight into this, into my Universal Audio X8P. And what I wanted to do is show you, I've got 3 rigs set up with my own IRs for different things. So I've got one for higher gain, one for crunch, and one for clean. So on the clean, I've added things like compression, reverb, and delay, just so you can hear the difference. And we'll just go over a couple of things really fast so you get an idea of how it works. And then I just want to give you tones. So this is my main sound. This is rig 1 with a bit of reverb. This is how it sounds. Sounds great, and it feels like my amp, so that's really good. Sorry for less of an in-depth explanation there, but yeah, it does. So really quick, obviously there's phones level on the front, as you can see on the close-up. We've got line out, which is the level hitting my interface, so that's set where I need it to be. Then you got these 4 LEDs along the top, which basically represent things like if you got your amp control on. This is my solo EQ, things like, you know, any kind of specific EQ setting that I've got going on. Then I've got effects, so things like delay, and then if the effects loop's on in the Tube Amp Expander. The rig knob, and then this is control over my reverb, so this is really sick. So I've got reverb set on, but if I want more or less, I can have it off. So there you go. I'm going to show you really fast how it sounds with the room on. So let's bang a room on this. Let's go big room so you can obviously hear it. This is the big room. Sounds like a room. Small room. It's great. It does. It sounds like there's a room going on. But we'll go back to anechoic just because I'd rather have just straight direct sound. Put the reverb back in. Next, I'll show you the impedance curve, the reactive load situation going on here. Now, obviously, this is matched up for my amplifier, as it says on the table here. I'll show you a close-up of that again, put an overlay on. But I'm going to show you what it does. And the cool thing is, whilst I switch it, you can hear it mechanically changing the type of reactive load. So at the minute we've got high mid and low mid for a sort of high gain stack. But if I change it, listen, hear that? It's the click of the knob and then it switches. And that's the change of the reactive load. So this is set up for my amp currently. Change the reactive load to high mid. Subtle. But it's a feel thing. Anyway, set it back. And that was for presence. If I do it to resonance, that's low. You really feel that, the low end thing. It's like that resonance of that speaker. So this is... It's not resonating the same, but on the recommended one... It feels it feels like the speaker is resonating the right way, basically. That's kind of what I expect when I'm listening to my amp through a microphone setup, if that makes sense. So that's generally how it works along the front. Of course, I'll show you a close-up of the back panel. It has everything to do with your USB control, your MIDI outs, your line out for front of house, your XLR left and right out for yourself and for your interfaces, all the foot switch controls, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's move on. I'm going to show you my rigs for high gain and clean, and then we'll just do some playing. Okay, switching over to my high gain rig. This shall have delay and reverb now. So there's a quick demo of the high gain sound that I'd set up using reverb and delay. It's the same impedance response. But I tell you what, there's certain feel about it in terms of the attack of the notes and the low end chug that, you know, with my other ones, I totally get used to them and I use them and it's fine, and that's what I've used for years and stuff. So I'm very used to it. But it kind of feels and sounds like it's mic'd up in another room and I'm listening to the sound that it's a feel thing. I can't really describe it to you because you'll say, yeah, it's the sound IR, which it is. It's the same IRs that I use with all the other gear, but it feels different. It does. It feels different. And I can't really put my finger on what it is. I'll just end up noodling for hours. But it's something about that sort of punch in the note that it has, that in a real speaker cabinet situation in a room, you'd feel that. I don't know if John will add any of that. What I was doing was I was listening to that resonant punch that you get when you're using high gain into a 4x12, and it's got a punch about it, that, like I say, that resonant punch. And it does. It definitely has it. Even through my little studio monitors, I can feel that. Okay, next, clean. Let's try out the clean. Sounds nice. It's got that resonant rumble that I like from my amplifier. But I'm going to change it up because I want to hear if I can change the reactive loads to suit the clean sound better. Even though it probably, I don't know if it will, because the impedance, the reactive loads I've chosen are for a high gain stack amplifier. But I'll try it anyway. There's a diamond amp, which is a 212, and it says here that you want the high mid and the high. So high mid for my resonance. And then I want high. So actually, we'll go back for a sec. This is how it sounded before. And now let's switch it up and see what happens. I'm just going to switch it back and see what happens. So apologies for the incoherent rambling on the guitar I was doing there whilst I was listening to the impedance curve. I was trying to work out what I preferred for the clean. Now, although, as I say, it's meant to be on low mid and high mid, when I changed it to high mid and high for clean response, it did kind of, I got used to it fast and it felt good. Now, I'm not an engineer, so, you know, when it comes to amplifiers and all that kind of stuff. Now, they might say, a specialist might say, well, if you change the impedance response that the amp's supposed to be using, then it's not really an accurate representation. But the feel for me, and the sound is subtle, but the feel really has changed, you know, not tons, but it's enough that I'm like, that feels for me more like it works for clean, you know, but could be completely wrong in saying that. That's how it feels, you know. Anyway, I think that's fantastic that I even have the choice. You know, in the past, I've always just had what I've been given in terms of the reactive load. And it, you know, if you're really interested in getting the exact feel that you want from your amplifier in a home studio environment without using a cabinet, just straight out of, you know, into your interface, then it really does provide that. It really does feel different. It's impossible for you to know what I mean because it's a feel thing, but over the internet. But like, yeah, you need to try it out, especially if that's something that interests you. Anyway, that's a kind of overview of the tube amp expander and how it works. So let's just check out some tonage. Okay, well there you go. There is a look at the brand new Boss Waza tube amp expander. I wanted to give you an overview really. It's not an in-depth demo as such. There is a lot more to learn about this thing that I need to learn, and I've got Matt from Boss coming down. He's going to show me around it a bit more about all the other stuff you can do with it. But I wanted to show you how it sounds, and I wanted to hear it in my rig, in my setup, and make up my own mind about it. And, you know, for me personally, what's really important is that I get it's all about the feel. So whatever I end up using, it's because it's a feel thing more than anything else. Sound is obviously as important, you know, but I think you can have the best sound in the world, and if it doesn't feel good to play, then, you know, it's not rewarding. It's a battle, and you don't want that. You want it to feel good, and that's the thing about this. It feels really good. I've not really struggled with any of the other stuff I've used. So I'm not sat here going, oh, this is better than everything else. But the thing that Boss have done, and they always do really well, is they provide everything you could want, and then you choose how you want to use it. Having the ability to dial in a reactive load suited to any amplifier I might come across, whether it be a high gain monster, a classic tweed combo, an old clean amplifier. For example, one thing I've always struggled with is, let's say I use a V40 or a V140 or any kind of clean amp like a Fender Twin. Down here in this studio, using the gear that I've got, I've always struggled to get a really convincing, beautiful clean tone that I really enjoy using. I'm confident that using Tube Amp Expander, I could probably get the kind of feel that I want from a clean amplifier in a load box. Because we all know that clean amplifiers sound best through a cab, filling that room up with ambience, whereas I think this would probably do the job. I haven't tried it yet, so we're yet to see, but I'm pretty confident it would. Having the ability to change the reactive loads to 16 different combinations, 16 different types of reactive load, is more than you could ever need. Having the onboard effects, being able to apply effects to any amp that doesn't have an effects loop is genius. The attenuation process with this piece of equipment is genius. The fact you can, send your amplifier safe to a nice load that's suited to it and then reproduce that with 100 watts analog power section, it's great because it means there's no notching of any kind of attenuation, there's no too little or too much, and also it doesn't step down the EQ quality or the integrity of the sound of your amplifier through any kind of transistors or resistors or whatever it is. Basically, it gives you an accurate representation of your amp at any level that you want, and you can also put through it an amplifier that's notoriously quiet in a band application like a 1 watt or a 5 watt, boost it to your heart's content, 100 watts. So as I said, Boss always provide more than you could ever want, and they do it in a really cool way. This thing also looks great. In any case, that's the tube amp expander. I'm going to get one, I'm going to have it in the studio, and I'm going to get to know it, and we're going to do other videos on it and how we can use it in different scenarios. But for now, I'm going to get used to it, going to get to know it, and I'm really, really happy that Boss sent one for me to try out. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section. I'll put links in the description box. Until next time, I've been Rabea, and I'll see you all very soon.